Hello again, this is Preheat. Welcome back to another World of Warcraft video. I'm the Wowhead Guide Writer for Fire Mage and Devastation Evoker, and I've also been playing a lot of Augmentation and Fire in high keys. And today I want to discuss the current state of Augmentation and why it is that Augmentation feels so fundamentally necessary to do any sort of Mythic Plus key. I want to start this video off with a disclaimer. You do not need an Augmentation Evoker to do a key. But as the key level goes up, it is true that Augmentation is just fundamentally important to the group, and its chokehold it has on the current meta is very obvious. Even though Augmentation Evoker has been nerfed, this is going to continue to be the most broken DPS specialization in the game unless Blizzard changes something very fundamental about it. And this is having an impact on every DPS specialization in the game, but especially Devastation Evoker. I know a lot of players out there, myself included, are playing Augmentation and keys and we're enjoying it, but we kind of miss playing Devastation sometimes. Now, I don't know about you, but if I try to join a group as Devastation, I always get asked to play Augmentation unless there's already an Augmentation Evoker in that group. And that is correct. There's actually no reason to play Devastation Evoker in Mythic Plus right now unless there's an Augmentation Evoker in your group, because you do not bring the defensive capabilities that Augmentation brings. You will bring the same damage, maybe even bring more damage, but it doesn't matter because in Mythic Plus, especially as the key level goes up, it becomes more important to just be able to survive the unavoidable damage and to increase the defensive capabilities of your tank and your healer, being able to top people off quicker with more intellect. This becomes way more important as the key level goes up. And Augmentation also just makes everyone else feel better about their damage, right? Doing bigger numbers is fun. If you're playing the Fire Mage, you want to have a Shadow Priest in your group to give you PI. You want to have an Augmentation Evoker in your group to buff you. So I want to emphasize that Augmentation Evoker does not exist in a vacuum, and the overpoweredness of the other classes in the God comp. So we're talking Guardian Druid, Holy Paladin, Fire Mage, Shadow Priest. These other specializations being overpowered is also having a downstream effect on Augmentation because in a way, they're kind of force multiplying how overpowered Augmentation is. It's important for us to first look at how adjustments have been made in the past couple weeks to understand the lens that Blizzard is using to kind of think through these changes and to maybe get some insight into how it might be changed in the future. So on July 21st, Augmentation Evoker was adjusted. Its damage was deemed overpowered in dungeons. They were saying that it was doing less direct damage than intended. They want to adjust the damage of their personal damage so that basically more of the damage is coming directly from you as opposed to from your teammates. And the way that they did this was by mainly having your closest clutchmates. That's your buff where basically your Breath of Aeons and your Ebon might do more in 5-man content versus a raid, which is great because you're only buffing 2 DPS in that scenario, right? They're lowering that, but then they're also making other adjustments to increase your own personal damage. So Ebon Might is now giving you more personal damage, and also eruption damage is just increased by 40%. That's pretty big. But yeah, other adjustments are here too. I'm not going to talk about every single note here. I just want to very briefly emphasize this once again. Aspect's Favor amplifies Black Attunement to 10%. Instead of 16%. This is huge. This change alone is enough to basically lower the highest theoretical key that you could do as a group by probably 1, just like on its own. That's kind of insane. But the overall effect of these changes is that Augmentation Evoker is now around 4% less effective in Mythic Plus, so not much has really changed. You're losing a portion of your health. Effectively, it's around 5.1% stamina that you're losing, and you're also losing around 2% healing power. But the fact that you're giving the group healing power, the fact that you're giving the group stamina in the first place, right, is enough to keep this class in its state where it's going to be meta forever unless they change this. That's not to say that utility isn't a staple for most DPS specializations, but obviously it varies quite widely depending on which one you're talking about. So I think the closest one for comparison to Augmentation Evoker is probably Shadow Priest. Generally a lot of damage coming out of this class, a lot of free damage, you could say, because you don't really lose single target if you're funneling on one target and you're AoEing everything else with Shadow Crash. So there's a lot of reasons why you would want a specialization like Shadow Priest, right? That class alone is overpowered too. I'm not saying that there aren't other overpowered specs. I just want to focus in on Augmentation because what it brings is much larger. We're not just buffing the group's health. We're also buffing how much healing the group can do. We're buffing just how strong we feel as a comp. And unless you change how much you're giving to the comp outside of your damage, unless you greatly reduce the amount of damage you're contributing to the point where it is significantly lower than most other DPS specializations, you're not going to ever reach a situation where Augmentation Evoker isn't just the go-to for keys. And you know, if we want to talk about Augmentation Evoker as a DPS specialization and how it fits into the meta, I think it's also important to talk about Devastation Evoker. Devastation. That rings a bell. I think that's the other DPS specialization for Evoker. Now, obviously, Devastation is very strong still in Raid. It was featured in the Race to World first. Very strong DPS for all of Aberrus, and it will continue to be a very strong DPS specialization moving forward, despite its very slight nerf to the mastery in 10.1.5. But what we're talking about today is Mythic Plus specifically. So there's a couple reasons why Augmentation is just flat out better than Devastation. Number one is probably the least impactful, so damage profile. Augmentation's damage profile basically matches whatever you play it with, but it does have a spike every 2 minutes, or it's actually roughly shorter than 2 minutes with Breath of Aeons. That is where a lot of the damage occurs, and it actually lines up really well with most classes because 2-minute burst is kind of staple, you could say. So its damage profile is malleable, and its overall damage in the group is good, but not spectacular, right? It's not topping damage usually in the key. Usually it's slightly below. So damage is not bad, but it's not like the highest tier, okay? When it comes to Devastation, the damage is much more baked into the 2-minute cooldown of Dragon Rage. And if you're playing Devastation, you're probably playing with an Augmentation Evoker, so you're probably syncing everything with your Shadow Priest PI as well. So basically, the end result is that the group has issues dealing damage outside of your 2 minutes, because with the 2 minutes, you have your Dragon Rage, you have extremely high burst, you completely annihilate the pack, and then the next pack is just really, really slow. When it comes to single target versus AoE talents and how you lose damage depending on which you go into, which you specialize in, Augmentation and Devastation are kind of on equal footing, because Devastation drops barely any single target to go AoE, and Augmentation basically changes just, you know, your cooldown reduction talent. That's it. So they're essentially the same in that regard too. So next up, we have to talk about your ability to survive in a high key, and Devastation Evoker and Augmentation Evoker have quite a gap in their survivability, their defensiveness, but I'm not even going to start with that. Let's talk about aggro first. So Devastation Evoker by design has aggro issues. It deals more threat up front, and it is very bursty, and to maximize the damage of Devastation, you need to be good at front loading your damage. The issue there is that most tanks deal the least amount of threat on the pull, and it's pretty common for you to have to wait for threat to be established. Now, that's fine, but Devastation Evoker still often pulls threat even after waiting, and this is mainly due to the fact that, once again, you just have so much burst, right? You're so upfront with your damage, and something that people don't really consider often is that none of your damage is really being mitigated by something else, right? So, you know, think about like Shadow Priest, for instance. They have some pets, some guardians that deal damage. It's not a lot of their damage, but there's a small portion. Or like with Warlocks, Demonology, they may have a pet taking some of their threat. A lot of classes have a very small sliver of their threat that's being taken away by something else, something that's doing damage that isn't you. With Devastation Evoker, it is all coming from you, so you get 100% of the threat that you're dealing out. And in addition to that, if you're being augmented, right, if you have Augmentation Evoker buffing you, then you're force multiplying the threat that you're dealing. Now, of course, if you're playing with Augmentation, then they can put their talent, their Timelessness buff on you. And obviously, to get this talent on you, you have to play with the Augmentation Evoker, which means you have to play with 2 DPS Evokers in the same comp. Threat issues aside, though, Augmentation and Devastation just aren't even in the same universe when it comes to how defensive Augmentation is. So Devastation isn't necessarily bad. It has really strong tools like Obsidian Scales, Renewing Blaze. Of course, you have to be proactive with these. If you don't press them ahead of time, you will probably just die. But it does have the ability to survive very high intensity damage coming in, as long as you see it coming, right? Which is good. I mean, it makes it skill based, but I think a lot of classes kind of work like this, so it's not necessarily out of the norm. That being said, though, you don't really have a lot of buttons for if damage is happening very frequently, and you often have to lean on Twin Guardians to kind of fill the gap to be able to survive certain things. On the flip side, Augmentation has everything Devastation has, but just way better and way more of it. So you obviously have Defy Fate, which is a cheat death. Probably one of the best cheat deaths in the game. On a 6-minute cooldown, you can basically just make a mistake and oopsie, you just died. Who cares, right? You just healed the group, whatever. Just don't do it again for the next 6 minutes. You also just have an increased duration on every buff, including Renewing Blaze, including Obsidian Scales. And not only that, your Obsidian Scales is also, once again, it's increasing your health. It used to be by 16%. Now it's 10%. Even still, that's a lot of extra health that you're getting from that. You also don't care as much about constantly pressing your DPS buttons because your damage is mostly coming from your buffs. So you have a lot more time to maybe top yourself or do other things that might help the group. So I'm not going to mention every little detail about how Augmentation is better, but if you play Augmentation in Mythic Plus now and you played Devastation before the patch, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is obscene how strong Augmentation is. I'd go so far as to say it's probably the tankiest DPS specialization in the game, and Devastation is probably one of the least tanky. So you have a choice, right? Going into the key, should I play the most tanky one or should I play the least tanky one? Should I play the one that everyone wants me to play or the one that only I want to play? Should I play the one that makes the entire group stronger or should I play the one that just makes me stronger, right? All of the tools Devastation has, Augmentation also has. That's the bottom line. And so because your damage isn't spectacular in the way that just eclipses Augmentations, you just don't really have a place in Mythic Plus anymore. And this is a problem. If they want to actually adjust how Augmentation fits into the meta, if they want these DPS specializations to be on equal footing, then either Augmentation needs to be completely cut down when it comes to its ability to grant defensiveness to your group and increase healing to your group, or the damage needs to be substantially reduced. And I don't know what the solution is. I mean, this is a new thing, right? Like, we aren't used to this support role, but what we do know is that Blizzard has stated that they do not want Augmentation to be required in keys, and they said that if it feels like it is stepping on Devastation's toes, that they will bring it in line. So do you think they're going to buff Devastation, or do you think they'll nerf Augmentation in response to this? I don't really have the answer. I'm really just hoping that something is done because I don't really feel like I can play Devastation anymore. I mean, the pressure to play Augmentation is just so overwhelming, and it kind of feels bad because this is a specialization I enjoyed a lot before Augmentation was added. Don't get me wrong, I love Augmentation. I'm excited by specialization, but it's kind of sad that Devastation has kind of fallen into the place it is now. So do you think Augmentation Evoker is going to be brought back down to Earth, or do you think they're going to let it exist out in outer space until the next expansion just because it's new? Let me know in the comments below, and if you like this video, be sure to give it a like, and if you want to see more of my content, be sure to subscribe to the channel, ring that notification bell, and hopefully I see you in the next one.